When my father and stepmother entered my room that night, I saw in their eyes there would be no mercy. With each blow she landed on my face, my own father smiled as if it were a spectacle. I was only 14 years old when I planned my own death to escape the hell I called home. Hello, my dear friends. What a blessing to be here with you today. I'm Diane Oliver Matthews. I'm 68 years old, and before continuing, I need to share something with you. The doctors gave me the news 3 weeks ago. I have terminal ovarian cancer. They've given me just a few months to live. That's why I decided to record these videos, to leave my story as a testimony for other warrior women who might be going through difficult situations. To all the dear ones in this world where I won't be present in a few months, please comment, "Strength Diane." It would really make me feel better. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I live in this blessed town of Millbrook, here in rural Georgia. A place that welcomed me when I most needed a fresh start, a little corner of peace that I now call home. Each day is now a precious gift, and being able to share my journey with you is a way to give meaning to all the suffering I went through. If you could leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, you'd be helping me spread this message to other women who need to hear that it's possible to overcome even the most terrible situations. One of the things I love most about my life is this garden. I started it almost 30 years ago, after I moved here. It's my little corner of peace, where I talk to God and thank Him for each sunrise, even now that I know my sunrises are numbered. I'm sitting here on my porch, in the rocking chair that my Joseph made for me before he passed. From here, I can see the mountains in the distance and feel the cool afternoon breeze. Beside me is a small table with my lemon balm tea and the old photo album that I cherish so much. These are memories of a life that had much pain, but also much joy and triumph. Today, I'm going to tell a story that I've kept in my heart for many years. A story about losing the person we love most in the world and how life can change completely overnight. About how a girl had to become a woman too soon, and how sometimes we need to make difficult decisions to survive. It's a story of pain, my children, but also of redemption and new beginnings. It all started back in the 60s, when I was just a little girl with braids, running through the red clay yards of Pineville, my hometown here in Georgia. Our life in Pineville was simple, but full of love. We lived in a small 3-room house, with a dirt floor and a roof that made that loud noise when it rained. The yard was big, with peach, apple, and pecan trees that I loved to climb, even though I knew I'd get scolded by my mother, Miss Zoe. Ah, my dear mother. Miss Zoe was the sunshine of our home. Short, plump, with black hair always tied in a bun, and a smile that lit up everything around her. She worked as a seamstress, making dresses and alterations for people in town. She had fairy hands, as the neighbors used to say. At night, after finishing her chores, she always came to put me to bed, telling ghost stories or tales from the olden days. Even when tired, she never failed to stroke my hair until I fell asleep. "Diane, my child, education is the only thing that no one can take away from you," she always said, while helping me with my lessons. Mom hadn't studied much, only up to 3rd grade, but she could read well and insisted that I learn everything properly. She kept every drawing I made at school, every note from the teacher praising my behavior. My father, Mr. David, was very different. Tall, thin, always wearing a hat, and with that distant look. He worked as a mason and spent days away, building houses on farms in the region. When he was home, he spoke little. He was a stern man, the kind who doesn't need to raise his voice to be respected. One look from him was enough to make everyone quiet. He was never affectionate, never put me on his lap or said sweet words. But Mom always said, "Your father loves you in his own way, child. Old-fashioned men are just like that." Our routine was set by Mom's clock. We woke up with the first rooster crow around 5 in the morning. While she prepared coffee on the wood stove, that fresh coffee smell with cornbread that I never forgot, I set the table. After eating, I helped wash the dishes and sweep the yard before going to school. The school was about 2 miles from home. I walked there with other children from the neighborhood. On the way, we played tag, told stories, and laughed carefree. My best friend was Irene, daughter of Mr. Andrew, the general store owner. We were inseparable, like two fingers on the same hand. Together we played house, with corn husk dolls that Mom made for us, ring around the rosy, and hide and seek in the orchard. On Sundays, we all went to Mass at St. Sebastian's Baptist Church. Mom dressed me in my best dress, made by her own hands, and combed my hair with rice water to make it nice and straight. After church, families gathered in the square. Women chatted, men played cards or dominoes, and we children ran free, buying popcorn and cotton candy from vendors. During the 4th of July celebrations, the entire town was decorated with colorful flags. Mom made corn pudding, grits, cornbread, and Dad built a bonfire in the yard. Neighbors came, bringing guitars, and sang until late. These were rare moments when I saw my father smile, especially after a few sips of moonshine. It was around my 10th birthday when I noticed something different about Mom. She was always tired, drank a lot of water, went to the bathroom all the time. "It's just fatigue, child, too much work," she would say, but I could tell something was wrong. One day she fainted while sewing. Dad carried her in his arms, one of the few times I saw him show any emotion, and took her to the only doctor in town, Dr. Arthur. That's when we discovered she had diabetes, a disease that nobody in our area really understood. The doctor explained that the sugar in her blood was too high, that she needed care, expensive medicines, a special diet. My father remained silent as usual, but that night I heard him crying softly in the yard, smoking his pipe tobacco. Mom's health gradually worsened. Her legs began to swell, her eyesight weakened. Even so, she continued to sew, take care of the house, comb my hair before school. "Diane, my child, learn everything you can. Education is the only thing that no one can take away from you," she always repeated, as if she knew she wouldn't be with me for long. In the last months, she could no longer work. She spent her days lying in bed, and I took over the household chores. I learned to cook, to do laundry, to iron. Dad worked double shifts to pay for the medicines, came home tired and quieter than ever. At night, I would sit by Mom's bed, tell her about my day at school, and she would smile weakly, caressing my hair like in the old days. On a rainy afternoon, I returned from school and found our neighbor, Miss Ruth, waiting for me at the gate. From her look, I understood everything immediately. I ran into the house, slipped on the mud floor, fell, got up, entered the room, and there she was, my mother, motionless on the bed with a serene expression, as if she were just sleeping. She had passed while I was learning fractions at school. That day changed everything. At the wake, I observed my father. He remained standing the whole time beside the coffin, without shedding a tear, without saying a word. When people came to offer condolences, he just nodded. There was no "I'm sorry" for me, no hug, no gesture of comfort. It was as if he had frozen inside. And that's how, at 12 years old, I found myself alone with a father who barely knew how to talk to me, in a house that without my mother no longer seemed like a home. The months following Mom's passing were filled with silence. Dad left early for work and returned late, often smelling of whiskey. I took care of the house as I had learned, went to school, came back, cooked, did laundry. Sometimes I would spend hours looking at Mom's clothes in the trunk, inhaling her scent that was still there, faint but present. At night, I cried softly so Dad wouldn't hear. He never spoke about Mom after she was gone. It was as if he had erased her from memory. I was 14 when everything changed again. One Friday, Dad came home earlier than usual and said, without preamble, "Clean up the house. Company's coming tomorrow." That was it. No explanation, no details. Typical of him. The next day, I got up early, swept the yard, polished the few pieces of furniture we had, killed a chicken, and made a stew like Mom had taught me. Around noon, I heard the sound of Dad's truck arriving. When I went out to the yard to greet them, I was shocked. Beside him was a woman I had never seen before. Nancy, that was her name, was the opposite of my mother. Tall, thin, with bleached blonde hair and long red nails. She wore a tight dress that showed all her curves, lipstick the same color as her nails, and a strong perfume you could smell from afar. She smiled at me, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "This is Nancy," Dad said. "My fiancée. She's going to live with us from today on." Fiancé? My head spun. It had barely been a year since we buried Mom. "What do you mean, fiancé? What do you mean, living with us?" But I swallowed my questions. With Dad, there was no point in questioning. Nancy entered the house, looking at everything with an air of displeasure. "It's small, isn't it, David? And it urgently needs a coat of paint." Then she looked me up and down. "The girl needs some care, too. Looks like a boy with that messy hair." That same day, she had already arranged her things in Dad's room. She brought 2 large suitcases full of clothes and bottles of perfume. At night, I heard sounds coming from their room that made my face hot with embarrassment. At first, Nancy tried to appear helpful. She cooked, not as well as Mom, but edible, swept the house, even tried to teach me how to apply lipstick. But there was something in her eyes that gave me chills. A cold, calculating gleam, as if she was always planning something. It was at school that I discovered who she really was. Irene called me to a corner of the schoolyard during recess. "Diane, is it true that your father is with Nancy from the roadhouse?" My stomach froze. "What do you mean from the roadhouse?" "That red house on the way out of town, near the river. Everyone knows it's a place of, you know." Irene lowered her voice. "My dad doesn't even let us pass near there. Says it's a place of sin." I returned home that day with a weight on my chest. Now I understood the looks and whispers when I passed on the street with Nancy. The whole town knew what I, in my innocence, had not realized. Gradually, Nancy's mask began to fall. She stopped cooking, said she was tired, that I was old enough to take care of the house by myself. She spent hours getting ready in the bedroom, trying on clothes, painting her nails. At night, she and Dad would go out and come back late, both smelling of alcohol. One day, upon returning from school, I found Mom's room completely transformed. Her clothes had disappeared from the trunk. Her few personal belongings were no longer there. In their place, Nancy had put a large dressing table with a mirror and more bottles of perfume and makeup than I had ever seen. "Where are my mother's things?" I asked when she arrived, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "Threw them away. They were old rags, full of mold. This house needs new things." Something broke inside me at that moment. I ran to the yard and cried, hugging the peach tree that Mom loved so much. It was the first time I felt real hatred, not just for Nancy, but also for my father, who allowed her to erase Mom's memory that way. Things got worse when I turned 15. Dad started spending more time at home, always watching me. Nancy, too. It was as if they were monitoring me. And it was during this time that I began to notice how much my body was changing. I was no longer the skinny girl from before. I was becoming a young woman, as Miss Ruth used to say. One day I woke up with a high fever. I couldn't go to school. I lay there shivering under the blanket, alone at home while Dad worked. When Nancy arrived and found me like this, instead of taking care of me, she frowned. "Pretending to be sick to skip school? In my day, you'd get a beating for less." "I'm not pretending," I replied weakly. "I have a fever." She put her hand on my forehead with such force it almost hurt me. "Indeed. But don't think you're going to laze around. There's laundry to wash, food to cook." "I can't get up," I pleaded. Her gaze hardened. "Then you'll learn not to get sick." That night, when Dad came home, Nancy told a completely distorted story. She said I had pretended to be sick to skip school, that she had caught me talking to a boy at the gate, that I was becoming too flirty. It was the first time Dad raised his hand to me, a hard slap that left my cheek burning and my eyes full of tears. "In this house, there must be respect," was all he said before sitting down to dinner as if nothing had happened. From then on, any excuse was a reason to punish me. If the food was bland, if a piece of clothing wasn't well ironed, if I took a little longer at school. Nancy always found a way to get me in trouble with Dad. And he, who had never been affectionate, now became increasingly harsh, more violent. The worst day was when I skipped school to help Miss Ruth, who had fallen and hurt her arm. I spent the morning with her, bandaging her, preparing food, tidying the house. When I returned, I found Nancy and Dad waiting for me in the living room, both with unfriendly faces. "The principal called," Nancy said with a cruel smile. "You didn't show up at school today." "I was helping Miss Ruth. She fell and—" "Liar!" Nancy shouted. "You were with some boyfriend, weren't you? Just like your mother, who was always eyeing other men." "That was too much. Don't talk about my mother like that. She was decent, not like you who came from that place by the river." The silence that followed was terrifying. I saw Nancy's face contort with rage and Dad's harden like stone. He got up slowly, took off his belt. Nancy was smiling now, a smile that chilled me to the bone. "To the room," Dad ordered. "Now." What happened next is difficult to tell, my dear ones. There are wounds that even time doesn't completely heal. Let's just say that on that day I met a side of my father and Nancy that I didn't know existed. A dark, cruel side that fed on others' pain. While he beat, she watched, with that same smile on her red-painted lips. Lying in bed that night, unable to sleep from so much pain, I realized I had to do something. This wouldn't stop, it would only get worse. But what could a 15-year-old girl do against two adults? Where would I go if I ran away? How would I survive? It was on that sleepless, tearful night that I began to plan my escape. I didn't know yet how, but I knew I needed to leave that house before it was too late. The following weeks were a real nightmare. The punishments became routine, as if Nancy and Dad were competing to see who could make me suffer more. If before I was afraid to return home, now fear had turned into terror. Each creak of the gate announcing their arrival made my heart race. Nancy was a specialist in humiliation. "Look at this food. Even a pig wouldn't eat it," she would say, throwing the plate on the floor for me to clean up. Or, "With that ugly face and wild animal ways, you'll die alone like your mother." Dad watched it all silently, sometimes even smiling from the corner of his mouth as if he approved. The neighbors began to notice something was wrong. I, who had always been a talkative and cheerful girl, now barely raised my eyes from the ground when passing by. I lost so much weight that my clothes hung on my body. At school, my grades plummeted. How could I pay attention in class when my head was full of fear and my body ached? Miss Ruth tried to help in her own way. Whenever she could, she invited me for coffee, gave me a piece of cake, asked how things were. But I lied, said everything was fine. I was ashamed, you know? Ashamed to admit what was happening inside that house. Ashamed to say that my own father— One night, I heard the two of them talking in the kitchen. They had been drinking heavily and were speaking loudly, not caring if I was listening or not. "She's becoming just like her mother," Nancy was saying. "Did you see how Andrew's son looked at her at church on Sunday? Soon she'll get herself pregnant and will want us to support her." "That's not going to happen," Dad replied, his voice slurred from drinking. "As long as she's under my roof, she'll follow my rules." "And what if she runs away like the other one?" I froze hearing this. What other one? What was Nancy talking about? "She's not stupid enough to do that," Dad said, and I heard the sound of the glass hitting the table. "She knows very well what happens to a girl alone out there." That night I couldn't sleep properly. What other person had run away? Was it an ex-girlfriend of Dad's? Or— A terrible thought occurred to me. Did I have a sister I never knew? Someone who also suffered at his hands and found a way out that I hadn't yet discovered? Things got even worse when Nancy started searching my room. She said she was looking for evidence that I had been meeting with boys, love letters, anything to justify more punishments. One day, she found the only treasure I had left, a photograph of my mother that I had hidden under the mattress. "What's this?" she asked, waving the photo in front of me. "Give it back, please," I begged. "It's the only memory I have of her." Nancy's smile widened. Without saying a word, she tore the photo into tiny pieces in front of me and threw the remains out the window. Something broke inside me at that moment. The tears dried up, giving way to a cold, calculating anger. It was then that I understood I needed to leave that house at any cost, or I would end up completely losing myself. One day, after a particularly cruel punishment for arriving 5 minutes late from school, I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. My body hurt so much that breathing was difficult. My bedroom door had no lock. Dad had removed it long ago, saying that, in his house, there were no secrets. I heard footsteps in the hallway, and soon Nancy appeared at the door, with that cruel smile I knew so well. "Your father wants to talk to you in the living room, now." I got up slowly, my body protesting with each movement. In the living room, Dad was sitting in the old armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand. He seemed calm, which was more frightening than when he was visibly angry. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to the floor in front of him. There was no chair for me. I was supposed to sit on the floor, like an animal. I obeyed, eyes fixed on my bare feet. "The teacher sent a message, said you didn't turn in your homework 3 days in a row." My heart raced. It was true. I hadn't been able to do the assignments because Nancy forced me to clean the entire house every day after school until late at night. "I didn't have time," I muttered. "Didn't have time," Dad repeated, as if savoring each word. "Do you know how much it costs me to send you to school? The books, the notebooks, the uniform? And you didn't have time?" Nancy approached, stopping behind his armchair, her hands on Dad's shoulders, like a queen next to the king. "I told you she's just like her mother, lazy, ungrateful." "My mother wasn't lazy." The words came out before I could contain them. What followed was one of the worst nights of my life. The details are too heavy to share, my dear ones. Let's just say that night, both Dad and Nancy crossed a line that should never be crossed. She held, he hit. She suggested, he executed. Like a macabre dance that the two had rehearsed many times. When they finally left me alone, thrown like a rag on my bedroom floor, something changed inside me. Fear gave way to cold determination. It no longer mattered where I would go or how I would survive. Anything at all, would be better than continuing in that house. It was on that night that I began to observe their routine with different eyes, no longer as a frightened victim, but as someone planning a move. I noticed that every Friday, after Dad received his weekly pay, he and Nancy kept the money in a small safe hidden under a loose floorboard in their bedroom. I also saw that on Saturday nights, the two drank more than usual and slept deeply, almost in an alcoholic coma. And it was also during this time that I began to pay more attention to our neighbor in the back house, Mr. Lucas. A middle-aged man, single, who lived alone and rarely spoke to anyone. From the whispers in town, everyone knew he lent money at high interest rates, a loan shark, as they said, and that he wasn't afraid to use unconventional methods to collect what was owed to him. I remember once Dad commenting after a few drinks that Lucas is a man of respect. They say that Tommy from the store didn't pay a debt, and the next day he showed up with a broken leg. Coincidence, huh? And he laughed in a way that gave me chills. For days I observed Mr. Lucas's house. I saw strange men coming and going, always with unfriendly faces. Once, I saw a young man leaving there limping, his face swollen as if he had taken a beating. Mr. Lucas was no angel, that was clear. But, in the desperate situation I found myself in, even the devil seemed a potential ally. One afternoon, when Nancy had gone into town and Dad was at work, I found the courage and knocked on Mr. Lucas's door. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would jump out of my mouth. When he opened the door, I almost gave up. He was a big man, with thick eyebrows and a penetrating gaze. He had a scar that cut across the right side of his face, from forehead to chin. "What do you want, girl?" he asked, his voice hoarse from smoking too much. "I need your help, mister." "Lucas," I said, my voice barely coming out. "Can I come in?" He looked me up and down, as if assessing whether I was worth his time. Then he stepped aside, opening the way. His house was surprisingly clean and organized, no empty bottles or dirt, as I had imagined. In the simple living room, just a worn sofa, a table with 4 chairs, and an old radio. "Speak up," he said, sitting at the table and lighting a cigarette. "I don't have all day." The words rushed out, like water from a breaking dam. I told him everything, well, almost everything. I talked about the punishments, about how Nancy and Dad treated me, about how I needed to run away before it was too late. I didn't go into details about the worst nights, but I think he understood from the way his gaze hardened as I spoke. "And what do you want me to do?" he asked when I finished, putting out the cigarette in the ashtray. "I'm not a social worker, girl." "I know you're not," I replied, gathering all the courage I had left. "But you have connections, people who work for you, and I also know about the safe in their room." Mr. Lucas raised an eyebrow, now truly interested. "What exactly are you proposing?" And that's how, that afternoon, the most desperate and risky plan of my life was born. A plan that, if it went wrong, could cost me much more than a few punishments. But I had nothing left to lose. I returned home that day with my heart pounding, divided between fear and hope. Mr. Lucas had listened to my plan, made some modifications, and to my surprise, agreed to help. "It's not for the reward," he said as we were saying goodbye. "There are things that even I, with all my reputation, can't tolerate. What your father and that woman are doing to you is one of them." The plan was simple, but risky. On Saturday night, when Dad and Nancy were sleeping after their usual drinking binge, Lucas and his co-workers would enter the house as if it were a robbery. They would go straight to my room, kidnap me, and fire a shot in the air, far enough not to hurt anyone, but close enough for Dad and Nancy to hear and think I had been killed. Then they would invade their room, take the safe, and disappear into the night. "And afterward?" I asked Mr. Lucas. "Where will I go?" "I have contacts in Millbrook," he replied. "A town big enough for you to hide, far enough for them not to find you. I know people who can give you work, a place to stay, until you get established." In the days that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. Every look from Dad, every gesture from Nancy, made me think they had discovered the plan. Sleeping became almost impossible. Eating, then, forget about it. I lived with a permanent knot in my stomach. On the Friday preceding the big day, something happened that almost made me give up everything. I was returning from school when I saw Nancy talking at the gate with Miss Ruth. The two seemed quite at ease, laughing like old friends. When I approached, I heard Nancy say, "She's a difficult girl, you know. Tries everything to get attention. Even made up that her father hit her." Can you imagine? David, who wouldn't hurt a fly. Miss Ruth saw me coming and smiled, a different smile than she used to give me. There was suspicion in her eyes now. "Hi, Diane. Your stepmother was telling me how well you two are getting along now." I looked from one to the other, feeling as if the ground had disappeared from under my feet. Nancy, the woman who tortured me day after day, was there, lying blatantly, turning me into the villain of the story. And the worst part, Miss Ruth seemed to believe her. "That's right," I managed to mumble before running into the house. That night, while washing the dinner dishes, I heard Dad and Nancy talking in the living room. "I spoke with all the neighbors," Nancy was saying. "If she tries to spread more lies about us, no one will believe her. I've prepared the ground." "Serves her right," Dad replied. "Ungrateful girl, after all we do for her." That was the last straw. I realized it wasn't just my body that was in danger in that house, but also my sanity, my soul. They weren't just physically hurting me. They were trying to destroy my reputation, make me doubt my own perception of reality. It was cruel, calculated, and I wouldn't stand it much longer. On Saturday, the day of the plan, I woke up with a renewed purpose. It no longer mattered what happened afterward. I had to leave that house that night. I did everything as usual, cleaned, cooked, stayed quiet in my corner. Dad and Nancy didn't even notice anything different in my behavior, so absorbed were they in their own pleasures. As expected, they started drinking early. First beer, then whiskey. With each sip, their voices grew louder, their laughter more thunderous. Around 10 o'clock, they were already staggering around the house. Nancy tried to pull me to dance with them, but I pretended to have a headache and withdrew to my room. "Always spoils our fun," I heard her complain as I closed the door. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I heard the loud music and laughter in the living room. Gradually, the sounds diminished. I looked through the crack in the door and saw they had gone to their room. It still took a while until complete silence settled in the house. When I finally heard Dad's loud snores, I knew it was time. I took the small bundle I had prepared, some clothes, my school notebook where I wrote down my thoughts, and a handkerchief that had belonged to my mother, the only thing of hers that Nancy hadn't found and destroyed. I hid everything under the pillow and lay down, dressed, waiting. At midnight sharp, I heard a noise at the window. It was the signal. My heart felt like it was going to explode in my chest. Mr. Lucas had been clear. I should lie down, pretending to sleep, and not make any noise. They would enter, kidnap me, and the rest would happen according to the plan. The following minutes were a blur of fear and adrenaline. I heard the noise of the kitchen window being forced, heavy footsteps down the hallway. Suddenly, my bedroom door opened, and 3 hooded men entered. Despite knowing it was all planned, I couldn't help a tremor of real fear. "Quiet," one of them whispered, grabbing me by the arm with enough force to look like a real kidnapping, but without really hurting me. We went out into the hallway, and that's when the plan almost went awry. The door to Dad and Nancy's room suddenly opened, and there he was, in his underwear, his eyes swollen from sleep and alcohol. "What the devil?" he began to say, but didn't complete the sentence. One of the men acted quickly, giving him such a hard punch to the face that he fell backward, unconscious. Nancy appeared right behind him, screaming like a madwoman. Another of the men pointed something at her. In the darkness, I couldn't see if it was a real gun, and ordered, "On the floor, now." She obeyed, trembling so much I thought she would faint. It was the first time I saw Nancy truly afraid, vulnerable, without that air of superiority. For a moment, I almost felt sorry. Almost. Everything happened very quickly after that. I was carried out of the house while one of the men stayed behind, supposedly to watch Dad and Nancy. I heard a loud bang, the agreed-upon shot, and then more noise inside the house. Minutes later, everyone was gathered outside, and we ran to a car that was waiting at the end of the street. Only when we were miles away, on the dark road leading out of Pineville, could I breathe properly. Mr. Lucas was in the front seat, next to the driver. He turned to me with a half-smile. "Everything went according to plan, girl. For all intents and purposes, you're dead. Tomorrow morning, when they manage to free themselves and call the police, they'll find blood stains in your room, chicken blood, but they won't know that, and they'll think it was a robbery gone wrong. And more importantly, they'll never look for you." I should have felt relief, but all I felt was an enormous emptiness. I had just simulated my own death, left behind the only life I knew. Even being a life of pain, it was still familiar. What awaited me now was completely unknown. "And the safe?" I asked, trying to push away the dark thoughts. Mr. Lucas gave a dry laugh. "We got it. There was more money than I expected. Your father had been saving up, it seems. Your share is saved, as we agreed. It will help you start your new life." I leaned my head against the window and let the tears flow freely. They weren't tears of sadness, nor of relief. They were tears of farewell. Goodbye to the girl I was, to that house, to that life. Goodbye to the town that saw me born, grow up, and almost die. The road ahead was dark and unknown, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. On the contrary, the unknown was a promise, a possibility, freedom, and that was worth any risk. We arrived in Millbrook as the sun began to rise. I'll never forget that first view of the town, the colorful houses, the churches with their pointed steeples, the movement of people beginning their day. It was a completely different world from what I knew in Pineville. "Here, no one knows you. No one will ask questions," Mr. Lucas said, as the car stopped in front of a simple house on the outskirts of town. "This is Teresa's house, a friend of mine. You'll stay here for the first few days until we arrange something better." Teresa was a lady in her 50s, with gray hair, a face marked by time, but with kind eyes that reminded me a bit of my mother's. She didn't ask questions when Mr. Lucas introduced me as a niece who needs a fresh start. She just nodded and showed me a small room in the back where I would stay. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Lucas," I said when he was about to leave. "I'll never forget what you did for me." He just shrugged as if it were nothing. "Here," he said, handing me an envelope. "It's your share from the safe. It's not much, but it will help you get started." When I opened the envelope after he left, I almost fell backward. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I hid it under the mattress, afraid to even count it properly. The first days at Teresa's house were strange. I jumped at every noise, looked back every time I went out on the street, had terrible nightmares where Dad and Nancy found me and dragged me back to that house of horrors. Teresa respected my silence, didn't insist on conversations, just left the food ready and clean clothes. After a week, Mr. Lucas returned. "I have a job for you," he announced, "at Mr. Joe's restaurant in the Central Square. It's not much, you'll start washing dishes, but it's an honest start." The Southern taste, Mr. Joe's restaurant, was the most traditional in town. It operated in an old mansion on the main square, with dark wooden tables and red and white checkered tablecloths. The smell coming from the kitchen was so good it made my stomach growl. Mr. Joe was a corpulent man with a thick mustache and a thunderous voice, but with a heart as soft as butter in the sun. He was about 60 and ran the restaurant with an iron hand, but treated employees like family. "Lucas told me a bit about your situation," he said on my first day. "I won't ask questions. I just want to know if you're hardworking and honest." "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to appear more confident than I really felt. "Then you're hired. You start today at the sink." And so my new life began. I woke up at 5 in the morning, walked to the restaurant, spent the day washing pots, plates, cutlery, until my hands were wrinkled and sore. I returned to Teresa's house at nightfall, so tired I could barely have dinner before falling into bed. But it was a good, honest fatigue, different from that exhaustion of fear I felt in Dad and Nancy's house. Over time, Mr. Joe began to teach me other things besides washing dishes. How to cut vegetables the right way, how to season beans to get them just right, how to make that fluffy rice that was the house specialty. I discovered I had a knack for cooking, perhaps a legacy from my mother. After 6 months, I was already helping in meal preparation. After a year, I knew all the recipes on the menu. Mr. Joe said, laughing, that I had a good hand for food. It was during this time that I met Ben, Mr. Joe's son. He had returned from Atlanta, where he studied business administration, to help his father with the restaurant. He was a handsome young man, a few years older than me, always well-dressed and polite. At first, we barely spoke. I was just the kitchen girl. He was the boss's son. But gradually, things changed. Ben began to appear in the kitchen more frequently, always with some excuse to start a conversation. Once, he caught me humming while cutting onions. "You have a beautiful voice," he said, making me blush to the roots of my hair. Gradually, I opened up to him. I didn't tell the whole truth about my past, of course. I just said I had lost my parents and come to Millbrook in search of a better life. He didn't insist on details, and I'm grateful for that to this day. Our first official date was a walk in the square on a Sunday off. He bought me an ice cream, and we spent hours talking about everything and nothing. It was strange, after so much time living in fear, to be able to simply sit on a park bench and laugh at silly things. Ben had that effect on me. He made me forget, if only for a few hours, everything I had been through. In 1 year, we were officially dating, with Mr. Joe's blessing, who seemed happier than the two of us combined. In 2 years, Ben proposed to me. "I don't have much to offer yet," he said, kneeling in front of me with a simple ring in his hands. "But I promise I'll work hard to give you the life you deserve." I cried so much that day that Ben became worried, thinking I was going to refuse. But they were tears of joy, of gratitude, even of amazement. How could life take such a big turn? From the beaten and humiliated girl in Pineville to the future wife of the kindest man I had ever met in Millbrook. Our wedding was simple, in the town's main church. Teresa was there, Mr. Lucas also came, although he stayed only for the ceremony and left right after. Mr. Joe cried like a child when he walked me down the aisle. He had insisted on giving me away, since I had no father. "You're like a daughter to me," he said at the party after a few glasses of wine. "From the first day, I felt that God had sent you to our family." In the first years of marriage, I continued working at the restaurant with Ben and Mr. Joe. We made a good team, me in the kitchen, Ben in administration, and Mr. Joe supervising everything, although less and less as age began to weigh on him. When Mr. Joe passed away 5 years after our wedding, it was a hard blow for all of us. The restaurant was closed for a week in mourning. When we reopened, Ben officially took command, and I became the head chef. "It's what Father would want," Ben said, hugging me tightly on the first day without Mr. Joe. "He always said you brought light back to this house when you arrived." Over time, Southern taste became even better known in the region. People came from far away to taste our dishes, especially the peach cobbler and the sweet cornbread that I had perfected over the years. We expanded the business, hired more employees, even opened a small inn in the back for tourists passing through. You know, my dear ones, when I look back at that night when I left Pineville in the back of a car, not knowing what awaited me, I could never have imagined that life had so many blessings in store for me. It wasn't a path without stones, of course not. I had to deal with the persistent nightmares, with the fear of being discovered, with the pain of memories that stubbornly returned. For many years, I couldn't even hear about Pineville without feeling a tightness in my chest. I had to invent a new story about my past, about my family, about who I was. But with Ben by my side, each day became a little easier than the one before. When we completed 10 years of marriage, I finally managed to tell him the whole truth. We sat on the porch of our house after the restaurant closed, and I opened my heart. I told him about Mom, about Dad and Nancy, about the abuse, about the planned escape. I cried like I hadn't cried in years, as the words came out like a dammed river that finally finds an outlet. Ben listened to everything in silence, holding my hands. When I finished, he hugged me so tightly I thought I would break. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," he said, his voice choked, "and I promise that as long as I live, no one will ever hurt you again." That night, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I no longer needed to pretend, no longer needed to be afraid. I had found not just safety, but true love, respect, dignity. Things that, for many years, I thought I didn't deserve or didn't exist for someone like me. And that's how, my dear ones, that frightened girl from Pineville transformed into the woman I am today. That's how I found not just refuge, but a true home in Millbrook. That's how I learned that, no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. Today, at 68 years old, I look back and see how life takes turns. I'm still here in Millbrook, in the same town that welcomed me when I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a handful of broken dreams. The Southern Taste restaurant still operates, now managed by our nephew Robert, Ben's sister's son, since we didn't have children. Ben left us 5 years ago. A sudden heart attack while he slept. It was so quick he didn't even have time to suffer, thank God. We were together for almost 40 years, an entire lifetime of companionship, respect, and love. I miss him every day, especially at dusk, when we used to sit on the porch to have coffee and watch the day end. Sometimes, I still set 2 cups on the table out of habit and only realize it when I've already poured coffee into the second one. It's these little moments that make me feel how much he's still present in every corner of this house. Our house is 2 blocks from the restaurant, a simple but cozy building with a large yard where I cultivate my medicinal herb garden. I started this garden almost 30 years ago after I discovered a lump in my breast. What a scare that was. Ben was more desperate than I was. But thanks to God, the doctors treated it in time, and I won that battle. During my breast cancer treatment, I became attached to medicinal herbs as a way to complement traditional medicine. I studied a lot about the subject, talked with the older ladies in town, recovered some recipes that my mother had taught me as a child. I remember that when I was little, I saw her preparing teas for sick neighbors, always with a smile on her face and a word of comfort. "It's the care that heals more than the herb itself," she used to say, and I believe that to this day. The garden started with a few small plants of lemon balm and lemongrass, and today it occupies almost the entire yard. I have basil, rosemary, mint, boldo, pennyroyal, rue, sweet basil, and many other small plants that I use to make teas and home remedies. Each bed has its story, you know? The chamomile one was planted when our grandniece was born. They say it calms babies. The rosemary was a gift from a restaurant customer who came from Charleston and became a friend. The rose bushes that surround everything came from cuttings that Ben gave me on our 25th wedding anniversary. The neighbors always come asking for a little tea for this or that, and I never refuse. Miss Louise, who lives on the corner, comes every week to get chamomile for her grandson who has colic. Mr. Anthony, the retired man from the Blue House, always asks for mint for his digestion. And young Patricia, newly married, who moved to the neighborhood last year, has already learned to make calendula ointment with me. I feel it's a way to honor my mother's memory, passing on the knowledge that she began to transmit to me, but which was interrupted so early. My routine is peaceful these days. I wake up early, with the first rooster crow, a habit I never lost from childhood. I make my coffee, take care of my plants, sometimes stop by the restaurant to see how things are going. Robert is a good manager, but he still likes to hear my advice, especially about the house's traditional recipes. "Grandma, nobody makes a peach cobbler like yours," he always says, and that fills me with pride. On Thursday afternoons, I teach cooking classes to underprivileged women at the neighborhood community center. I teach not only how to cook, but also how to transform this skill into a livelihood. Many of them come from difficult stories, some even similar to mine. I don't tell my past in detail, but they feel that I have a special understanding of what they're going through. Several of these women have managed to set up small businesses with meal deliveries, party cakes, homemade sweets. Jessica, who came here after her husband beat her and broke her arm, now has a food stall at the town's farmers market that supports her and her 3 children. Marlene, who was sleeping at the bus station when I met her, now supplies cookies to 3 small markets in town. When I see these women achieving their financial independence, I feel a joy that doesn't fit in my chest. It's as if, somehow, I was giving them the chance that I had when I arrived here. Each one who manages to free herself from a situation of abuse or dependency is like I myself being born again. On Sundays, I go to Mass at the main church, the same one where I married Ben. I always sit on the same bench, the third on the right, where we used to sit together. Afterward, I usually have lunch at Martha's house, his sister, with the whole family gathered. There's Robert and his wife, Christine, their children, my grandnephews, Peter and Gabriel. Sometimes August comes, another nephew of Ben's, with his family from Atlanta. The table is full, noisy, with children running everywhere. I have a very close relationship with all of them, even after Ben passed away. They are the family that destiny gave me, since I never had the courage to try to find out what happened to Dad and Nancy after that night. The children love to hear my stories, especially those from the old days, as they say. But they are carefully chosen stories, of course. I talk about my mother, about what life was like in rural Georgia in the 60s, about the games we played, about the old-time 4th of July celebrations. I never talk about the painful parts. Some things are better left in the past. For many years, I was afraid that Dad and Nancy would discover I was alive, that they would come after me. Even as an adult, married, established, this fear never completely abandoned me. Sometimes, I still have nightmares where I'm back in that house in Pineville, with Dad and Nancy chasing me through dark corridors. I wake up sweating, with my heart racing, and need a few minutes to remember that I'm safe, that it's all behind me, that they can no longer hurt me. Ben was the one who calmed me down in those moments. He would turn on the bedside lamp, hug me in silence, sometimes hum softly until I fell back asleep. After he was gone, I had to learn to calm myself down. Chamomile and lemon balm teas help, as do the prayers I learned from Miss Teresa all those years ago. But life has a funny way of closing circles. About 10 years ago, I was at the restaurant's cash register when an elderly lady came in, leaning on a cane. Something about her immediately caught my attention. It was Irene, my childhood friend from Pineville, now with completely white hair, but with the same lively eyes I remembered. My heart almost stopped. Would she recognize me? Would she know I was that Diane who everyone thought had died in a robbery so many years ago? I attended to her normally, my hands trembling so much I could barely give her change. "You're not from around here, are you?" I asked, trying to appear casual. "No, my child. I'm from Pineville, just passing through, visiting my son who moved here." I took a deep breath and gathered courage. I once knew a lady from Pineville. Her name was Irene. Her eyes widened. "That's me. But who are you, my child?" At that moment, I decided to tell the truth. I called Robert to take over the cash register and took Irene to the back of the restaurant. There, I told her my whole story. She cried, hugged me, asked for forgiveness for not having realized what was happening in that house. "After you disappeared," she told me, "a lot of things came to light. Your father and that woman left town shortly after. There were rumors, you know, that it hadn't been an ordinary robbery, but nobody had the courage to investigate further. She told me that my father had died of cirrhosis more than 20 years ago. Drinking finally took its toll. Nancy had ended her days in a nursing home for the indigent in a small town in Tennessee. No one had attended either of their funerals. It was a relief to know they had left Pineville, that I could never cross paths with them. Their deaths didn't bring me joy, as I had imagined they would when I was younger. They brought only a sense of closure, like closing a heavy book that one has carried for a long time. Irene promised to keep my secret, and we maintained contact until she passed away, 3 years ago. We used to exchange letters. She never adapted to cell phones, and sometimes, when her son came to visit her, she would spend a few days with me. We would sit on the porch, drink tea, and reminisce about the good things from our childhood, as if we were filtering the past, keeping only what was worth remembering. This encounter helped me make peace with my past, in a way. I realized that the frightened girl from Pineville and the woman I became in Millbrook were parts of the same story, a story of overcoming and resilience, and that made me value even more each good moment that life has given me since then. My dear ones who have accompanied me this far, thank you for listening to my story with such affection. I know it's not an easy story to hear, just as it wasn't easy to live. But I believe, from the bottom of my heart, that our testimonies have power. They have the power to heal, to liberate, to transform not only our own lives, but also the lives of those who listen to us. Now, with the news of terminal ovarian cancer and the doctors giving me only a few months to live, I feel a strange serenity taking over my heart. I'm not afraid of death, you know? I've had a full life, known true love, built something meaningful, helped other people along the way. What more could I ask for? If you're going through a situation of abuse, be it physical, emotional, or psychological, I want you to know that you are not alone. I want you to know that there is a way out, even when everything seems dark and hopeless. I know, because I've been there. I was at rock bottom, thinking there was no escape. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start anew each day. It doesn't matter if you're 15 years old, as I was, or 50 or 70. It's never too late to say enough, to seek help, to rebuild your life. My wrinkles are survival maps. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. When I look in the mirror today, I see not only the signs of age, but the marks of a warrior who refused to be defeated by others' cruelty. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even in the most difficult moments, when Dad and Nancy did everything to destroy me, something inside me remained intact, unbreakable. And it's that something that saves us in the end. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. Even hurt, humiliated, terrified, I never let them steal my essence, my humanity. And that made all the difference. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. How many times did I think about giving up? How many times did I think I couldn't bear another day in that house? But something inside us finds strength where we thought there was nothing. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. I carry the scars of my past to this day, but they don't define me, they don't control my life. They are just part of my story, not all of it. My story is not about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have become bitter, vengeful, distrustful of everything and everyone, but I chose love, trust, reconstruction. And that choice, which we make every day, is what determines who we become. This cancer that now spreads through my body is just another chapter, not the end of my story. Because my story will continue to live through each person who hears this account and finds courage to change their own reality. If you know someone who is suffering abuse, don't close your eyes. Don't do like some neighbors in Pineville who saw the signs but chose not to get involved. Sometimes a simple gesture of support, a friendly word, an extended hand can save a life. It could have been the difference between life and death for me if someone had intervened. Today, in every country, there are organizations, shelters, support lines for those suffering domestic violence. Seek help, inform yourself about the resources available in your region. The internet, which connects us now through this video, can also be a powerful tool for finding the necessary support. You don't need to go through this alone, as I did. And for those who, like me, have already managed to escape the cycle of abuse, your story matters. Your testimony can be the light at the end of the tunnel for someone who is still trapped in darkness. Don't be ashamed to share your journey when you feel ready. The shame belongs to the abusers, never to the victims. Before I say goodbye, I want to make a special request. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell right now. Each subscription means that one more person may hear stories like mine, stories that can save lives. Each like and each comment is like a hug I receive in these last months I have left and gives me the certainty that my journey was not in vain. And if you can, leave a comment with strength, Miss Diane. This will give me much comfort in these difficult days I've been facing with palliative treatment. Each message from you is like medicine for the soul, giving me strength to continue recording these videos while I still have energy. Share this video immediately with someone you think needs to hear this. Maybe a friend who is in an abusive relationship and hasn't realized it yet, or someone who has just left a difficult situation and needs hope. Never underestimate the power of a simple share. It can be the first step for someone to seek help. And in the comments, leave the word health if you watched until here. This will help me know that my story is reaching hearts, that I'm not speaking into the void. Do this now, Don't wait even one more minute. Together, we can create a chain of support and hope that reaches women in all corners of this country. I finish with a peaceful heart, knowing that even when I'm no longer here, my story will continue to live through you. Like that small herb garden I planted 30 years ago and which now flourishes with a life of its own, I hope that my words planted today will flourish in actions of courage, solidarity, and love. Thank you for listening to me. May God bless each one of you.